Welcome to the Rural Social Worker Closing the Gaps Despite the Distance podcast. I am your host, Andrea Charles, and this is the space where we will delve into the heart of rural landscapes and explore the essential role of social workers in bridging the gaps in rural social work. Join me as we navigate the unique challenges, celebrate the triumphs, and uncover the stories that shape the fabric of rural life. Together, let's embark on a journey to understand the transformative impact of social workers in the forgotten communities of our nation. A quick note, while our discussions provide valuable insight, please remember that this podcast is not a substitute for official supervision or guidance in your professional practice. Well, welcome to this episode of The Rural Social Worker. I have Angelo Sandoval on today, and he's going to briefly introduce himself before we get started.
Hello, my name is Angelo Sandoval, and I am from northern New Mexico, the Española area, just a few miles north of our capital, Santa Fe. I have lived here my whole life, and I am probably 12 generations in northern New Mexico. My family has been here since the Spanish time, since the Spanish government and conquest of northern New Mexico through the Mexican government and through the U.S. government. The town I live in was actually named after my dad's family, the Cordova family. So I live in a small town by the name of Cordova, New Mexico. And I have been living there all my life. And I work in the city of Española. And I've been a social worker and a nurse for the last 20 years as a nurse and 14 years as a social worker.
Okay. That's a combination. Do you still use both?
Fortunately, with my full-time job at Portrait Health, being the clinical director, we also have MAT, or medication-assisted treatment. So I'm able to incorporate both my nursing skills and knowledge and my social work skills and knowledge.
Excellent. So tell me a little bit about your work as a rural social worker and kind of what led you to the field of social work.
So I have two roles in social work in my area. So first, my regular job is as clinical director and program director for Portrait Health and the Rio Arriba County Drug Court program. So I'm the director and right now the only therapist for the company. So my primary role is working with people in drug court, providing the MRT groups and the individual therapy. Then I have a side job, a part-time job, which is a private practice called La Plebe Consulting, in which I continue my work working with fathers who are divorced, separated, or involved with child protective services. Now, those are the primary dads I work with, but any dad who needs support or any father figure who needs support, supporting their children, grandchildren, nephews, nieces, stepkids, I work with them in a 16-week program where we utilize DBT and Circle of Security parenting as the curriculums to support fathers. And so that's I carried that on from my previous employer. I ran the program for them, but I didn't want the service to lapse, so I started my own private practice to continue the fatherhood work.
Excellent. That sounds just like a fantastic resource to have. There's not a lot of resources out there specifically for fathers, so I think that's fantastic. What are some of the biggest challenges? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, so just you had mentioned a question, how did I start in social work? The interesting part is my grandmother used to work for Child Protective. Well, the agency is called Children, Youth, and Families Department. And in New Mexico, when my grandma was working for them, they were in charge of helping with child care services and child care payments for low-income families. So my grandma was housed in the same building as the Adult Protective Services and Child Protective Services, which was under the Social Services umbrella. Between when my grandma was there and I went to school to be a social worker, everything kind of fell under now the umbrella of the Children, Youth, and Families Department. So straight out of high school, I went into social work school, not knowing what it was. My idea was it was just helping people. That's all I knew about social work. But then my mom had lost her job at the National Lab. She was part of a reduction in force. So she lost a good paying job and had to work for the state as a dispatcher for state police. And that was, she took a major pay cut. I was at the time working at a casino, so I was making a lot of money for an 18-year-old. I was making a lot of money for an 18-year-old. So I dropped out of school and worked at the casino for a while, then found my way into nursing, became a nurse in 2004, an LPN. But in my attempt to finish RN school, I had to drop a couple of times. Was taking a lot of human services classes, a lot of psychology, sociology classes. So I ended up graduating with a degree in human services, an associate degree. And in that window, I met the recruiters from Mexico Highlands University, and they recruited me into the social work program. So I graduated with a bachelor's and a master's 2010, 2011 from Mexico Highlands University, and that started my career in social work and therapy social work.
Excellent. What are some of the biggest challenges that you think people in rural communities face when trying to access some of the social services?
So for northern New Mexico, I think one of the biggest obstacles is understanding of what treatment is. There is still this taboo about what treatment is. And then, of course, other resources is transportation, because a lot of people live far away. And our public transit system is not the greatest. We finally, in the last, I want to say 10 years, we got our first transit, but the bus only runs maybe once or twice a day to the outer areas. So like, even though my community is only 12 miles away where I live versus the city, the bus only goes up once in the morning and then once in the afternoon, or in the late afternoon or the evening. So if they have to take the bus, then they'll be in Espanola from about 8 a.m. till about 5:30 p.m. So they're wasting most of their day just waiting for the bus if they don't have family to transport them. Of course, finances, Medicaid. So a lot of our people are on Medicaid, which does have a taxi service, but again, a lot of our people struggle with understanding how to utilize the taxi service. But the flip side to that is, because we are such a rural community and cell service is not the greatest, sometimes the taxi service has a hard time finding locations and the homes, because GPS doesn't work always accurately. Service is cut, so they can't really access that. So these are some of the major problems that we have. Now, in 2025, those gaps are being closed slowly and surely. But up until the last maybe 5-10 years, that was a huge problem in the past, was lack of transportation, lack of accessibility.
I can imagine having to spend all day waiting for transportation can make it hard to hold a job, or to, even if you do have a job, getting time off to be able to do that.
Correct.
Yeah. How does rural culture and tight-knit communities kind of impact the work that you do?
So I guess for me, it's a little bit unique because I understand the people. I'm part of the community. So for me, it's not so difficult to engage with the clients. I think the biggest obstacle that I have to overcome is the fact that I've never been a substance user. So that's the one thing that I always, that if they do have an issue, it's usually that, well, you've never used. What do you know about using?
Right.
And so normally what I do with that is I kind of take it a step back and say, okay, well, let's talk about how you started using. And then I talk about personal problems like family problems, financial issues, job issues, kid issues, like stuff like that. And then I kind of relate to a more at a personal level in terms of like life experience, and then what leads to the actual substance use. And when I do that, then they tend to be like, oh, okay, so we're talking about human experience rather than a specific issue. Then I help them understand that substance use is really more of a secondary problem to something much bigger, which is like mental health, of course, family problems, financial problems, lack of transportation, like these stressors that cause us to now learn to cope somehow, some way. So that's kind of, for me personally, that's one of my biggest problems. Some other more generalized problems is if you're not from the local area, a lot of locals are very wary about outsiders. So if you're not a people person, or if you're not one to like just be and just kind of, working and getting to know the people, then they struggle to be open to you.
Right. So you talked briefly about drug use, and how does that affect kind of the individuals and families in the rural area? I mean, in your area.
So Northern New Mexico is kind of, well, I don't know if it's unique as a whole, but it's a very interesting place because we have a lot of inner city problems in a very rural area. So we were number one in heroin overdoses for the longest time. I think now we fluctuate between like 1 and 3, depending on other counties and other areas in the Midwest and East Coast. But we're still in the top 3 of heroin.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the last couple of years, we've had a high surge of fentanyl, street weed fentanyl. So we don't see as much heroin, but we're seeing a lot of fentanyl. In the beginning, seemed like it was isolated between like individuals, groups of individuals. But when I started working at a methadone clinic in about 2018, 2019, this is when I really started noticing that there was a generational problem. We were seeing up to 3 generations in receiving methadone. We'd see grandpa, parent, and then the 3rd generation, right? All 3 of them rolling in together to the methadone clinic to dose that day. So at the methadone place where I really got to see the generational problem. When I was in one of my sociology classes, I actually wrote a paper showing that it wasn't necessarily a generational problem; it was more isolated. But it was because initially it wasn't generational, but it did eventually become a generational problem, and now we're seeing it. Now we're seeing it really, really manifest itself.
Is there substance abuse support in the rural communities, or I mean, in your community specifically for these people that are using? Is there, to help them get clean or programs and stuff, or is it limited?
It fluctuates, right? So there'll be windows of time where there's a lot of therapists, a lot of agencies, so offering support, and then there's not going to be enough, right? There's not going to be enough therapists, so agencies will close down because there's not enough therapists, or there's not enough, or the clientele is so spread out. And the problem is that a lot of clients, for whatever reason, struggle to engage in services, right? It might be they're not ready to quit. It might be that they think that they can't quit. So access varies, and sometimes there's a lot of access, and then sometimes there's limited access. Right now, we do have we have 2 methadone clinics. The clinic I work for, Porchlight, we offer MAT. We offer everything but methadone. A couple of our family practice clinics have providers that do Suboxone. So we have some behavioral health. We do struggle to have enough behavioral health because a lot of our clinicians end up moving to Albuquerque or Santa Fe or other places where there's more financial resources to raise your family in this business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a common problem in a lot of rural areas is the programs come and go because of lack of service or lack of providers. I don't know about your area, but our areas, people come in, they get tuition reimbursement or student loan repayment, and then once it's paid off, then they're gone.
Right. See, and that's how I ended up in this role at this clinic, and I had to leave my old clinic was because even though it's an awesome place to work, Las Cumbres Community Health Services is an awesome place to work. It's a great place, family friendly. Their focus is more children. I was the only clinician really focusing on adults, which was fathers and father figures. It's a great place to work, but their pay range was not. It wasn't enough for me to raise my family. Right, I'm a family of 5. And because of an illness that I got 3 years ago and an injury that I sustained in the hospital, I can no longer work as a nurse. Well, I mean, I could if I wanted to, but ethically, I don't feel right working at a nursing home or hospital when I have limited use of my left arm for safety reasons. So their salary wasn't covering my financial needs. So I was, and I had met my ceiling as in terms of advancement. I was already kind of capped off where I could go. And the only way to advance was someone to resign or retire, and that wasn't going to happen because a lot of those high positions were filled by people who were dedicated to the community, and So this place came along. It gave me an opportunity to grow, but also earn a little bit more financial freedom. So that was one of the issues, right? So I was fortunate enough to have a chance to become a clinical director and stay home, if you will. You don't have to travel 20 minutes a day, but I was able to stay home and not have to move to Albuquerque or even out of state to earn a decent living. So for me, I got fortunate that I was able to stay in Espanola and be able to serve my community.
Yeah. I want to touch on the jobs a little bit later, but on the substance abuse, is there, how do you think stigma and community perceptions kind of impact people seeking substance use in the smaller communities, because people know everybody and know where you're going, and they know what those programs are, where they're at, and how they, are getting there? Do you think that plays a role in them getting the services?
Yeah, I mean stigma is very, very, very strong. I have a couple of friends who have become sober, and that's really their message is, stop stigmatizing. These are people. Let's work on helping them find solutions to their problems, right? Therapy, MAT, residential. And I think there's a lack of, I think there's the old mentality that substance abuse is a choice is still very strong. Northern New Mexico tends to be, a decade or so behind the rest of the world in a lot of what we do. Time runs slow here. In fact, one of the books of essays that's written about New Mexico in early on in our history was called The Land of Poco Tiempo, or The Land of Little Time, right? Because time it is what it is. We just kind of hang out, we're not. But in the last 20 years, I would say 25 years, we've become more rushed. We've become more in the mainstream, right? Where now time is of an essence. Whereas before, when I was a kid, we didn't worry about time. We just kind of just hung out, we just went with the flow. But yeah, I mean, some things just run slow. But the one thing about Northern New Mexico is that memory runs deep. You can have a family that's been fighting for 3 generations, and they may not necessarily remember the details of the fight, but they remember that there's a fight, and we're going to continue this fight because we're going to honor that prideful moment, right? We're going to defend that. So people do get stuck with this. Well, some are closed-minded and say, well, it's just a choice. It's not a disease. It's not, and I've had to, in my role, I've had to sit there and really talk to people about the brain and how addiction happens, and break down Pavlov's experiment with the dog, right? Help him understand, this is what happens. This is how your brain adjusts. This is why we develop these problems. So it takes a lot of education, but it takes a lot of being able to break complex theories and complex things down to simple, everyday, relatable information so that people grasp it. Because a lot of our people are very intelligent, very smart, but when you're catching them in stress mode, you have to learn how to break things down as simple as possible. Because most of the time when you're getting them, they're stressed out, they're angry, they're frustrated, they're just done with their family member who's hooked. So you have to get it as simple as possible, as basic as possible, and tap into their emotional brain, and then bring them back into the rational brain. Because as we all know, those of us in this job know that when we're stressed, we don't think in our rational mind, right? We are stuck in that emotional mind. So it takes a lot of very, very intricate, basic understanding of stuff to be able to break through those walls, and then bring it back to the level of understanding that they have, But right. Yeah, it's a struggle.
Yeah. You mentioned that, you guys have these programs, they come and go, or, they may not have the support they need. But outside of that, is there a system in place that helps these people that are trying to get help for substance use, such as jobs available for them so that they can, be successful and, when they're out in these communities and getting better?
The Espanola is, we don't have a lot of industry here. The biggest industry we have is either local or state government, and the federal government, which is based out of the Los Alamos County, which is about 25 minutes west of Espanola. But that's a federal government job, right? So with that, you have to be clean because, right. You enter in with you need clearances to work in different areas. So, of course, if you have substance abuse problems, if you have any kind of criminal history, well, the deeper your background is, the less chances you have of getting a good job at the lab, right? And that's probably the financial hub of the area is the lab.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of our people, who are stuck with substances can't work there. A lot of people lose their jobs from there because they get stuck with drugs. But everything else is hard, man. Like we had a shoe store closed and a gas station closed because of our homelessness problem that we have. And we've developed a homeless problem in the last, what would I say, 5 to 10 years. While I was growing up, we had, I think it was 2 individuals who would walk the street, but they had homes. They just walked, and they hung out in town and they'd walk back home. But in the last 5-10 years, it's really blown up. So businesses are like, do we really want to stay here? Do we really want to come into Española? So that's been a difficult problem. And the crazy part though is a lot of our people who are homeless actually are locals that have family here. And it's just that they've burned those bridges so bad that families are like, you can't come back home if you're going to keep stealing from us or keep doing this or not stopping doing that. So they've resorted to living on the street.
Is there a homeless shelter where you live? I know a lot of rural communities, there aren't places for homeless to go. And so then that leads to more on the street. Do you guys have any place for them to go?
One. We do have one that opened just before COVID, but it's very limited. It's really more of a... So they open during the winter. They try to open as much as possible during the winter for overnights. In the summers, they tend to do more like day stuff, like showers, laundry, feed. So feeding, laundry, and showers is what they do the most. And if they are able to have a case manager on staff, then they work on trying to get people, resources, get them hooked to Medicaid, get them IDs, allow them to use their address as a way to be able to get their ID, get their mail. So they do make an effort to support the community, but there's also tension between the city and the shelter, the community and the shelters. There's a lot of tension. So that's a struggle. I tend to follow.
Why is there tension there?
What was that again?
Why is there such a tension there between those two?
I think a lot of it has to do with people's not understanding. A lot of people are very frustrated with the homeless problem in terms of like behaviors of some of the individuals. Being demanding for help, being demanding for money, encroaching on people's privacy or personal space. And again, because a lot of our family members, right? It's like, well, why are you here? Why you should be home? Just clean up yourself, get sober, go back home. That kind of mentality, right? So, it's a lot of that.
Okay. So there really isn't jobs for them to, I would imagine the lack of jobs would increase the relapse rate, because if you can't financially support yourself, then, other mental health stuff comes up, depression, anxiety, or whatever, and not being able to support yourself. And then you could relapse and go back to drugs. Do you see a lot of that?
Oh yeah. So when I used to work for Child Protective Services, in my first job as a social worker, there was a gentleman who would help us do community meetings with families to identify problems, identify the good things, the problem things, and then a plan of action to avoid legal intervention. So this gentleman worked for the state, but he was not tied to any specific office. His job was just to facilitate these meetings as a neutral party. And one of the things that he would mention, how he would introduce the process, was introducing the 5 most common problems that he's noticed in northern New Mexico, which was mental health / depression specifically, suicide, substance use, domestic violence, and sexual abuse. These were the 5 most common areas that he had noticed in his time as an investigator and other roles in the Child Protective Services area. So he always made sure that we talked about, okay, these are the 5 areas that we're most commonly used to see. So we're going to address any of these that come up and how we're going to address them in terms of therapy, services, and all that good stuff. So I learned that we do have a higher rate of sexual abuse than I ever realized as a private citizen. I started learning more about mental health and really what mental health really was. I knew about the drugs and the suicide because, I mean, I had friends who had committed suicide. I grew up around the drug problem. And the domestic violence, I grew up around that as well. I saw a lot of that amongst family members, neighbors. Heard about it at school from friends and, their families dealing with that stuff, the newspaper. But the sexual abuse and the mental health didn't really understand it when I was younger until now, until the last 20 years being in medicine.
What do you think are maybe some creative ways that rural communities are working around the barriers that we've discussed today, or at least the community that you live in? Do you see any creative things happening?
So one of our longest surviving or existing residential program, Oil Recovery, they actually incorporate farming as part of the residential treatment. So depending on what part of the year you go to their treatment center, it depends on what kind of farm stuff you do. So if you're there during the summer, then you're helping clean the acequias. If it's during late winter, early spring, you're helping clean the ditch, getting the land ready for planting. If you're there during the summer, you're working the garden itself. If you're there during the fall, you're helping with the harvest and going to farmers market and selling the produce. They did start a egg farm at one point, chicken farm to sell eggs. I'm not sure where it's at now. I really haven't spoken to anybody from there how their chicken farm is going, but they were doing that as well. So they're trying to incorporate a lot of cultural things, right? They would bring in Native Americans to do sweat lodge, curanderas or healers to do, what we call limpias, or like the spiritual ways of doing cleansings, acu detox, of course, bringing in different pastors from different churches to offer those services. So OIL really tries to incorporate a lot of the local cultural stuff as part of what they offer for the people to engage in. Drug Corps, what they do in terms of their volunteer hours is they allow them to participate with like the different churches, the different local associations like the Acequia Association and stuff like that to help like clean the ditch, work on repairing the ditch, cleaning yards, cleaning cemeteries. So they try to encourage them to engage in the cultural aspects of the community and kind of get back in touch with who these people are in terms of cultural in northern New Mexico. In part of my treatment, I do the same thing. I try and really have them identify like their cultural norms, their religious norms that they grew up with, or the ones that they've kind of been introduced to and feel that they're attached to, and then I encourage them to incorporate that into as part of their treatment, right? So if they're Catholic, hey, go talk to your priest. These are some of the things that Catholics do. You go talk to your priest, go check it out. You're evangelical, Foursquare Gospel. Hey, I know this pastor. He's pretty cool about da. Go talk to that person. If they're Native, who's the medicine man in your pueblo? Go talk to the medicine man. Go talk to the elders. And whatever else comes through, right? So I try to encourage them to tap into their cultural foundations and incorporate it as part of their clinical stuff, right? So I tell them spirituality and science work hand in hand and not opposed to each other.
What advice would you give someone in a rural area who needs help but kind of doesn't know where to start?
I would say is if you have a community health clinic, go there. If you have access to any type of clinic, go there first, if that's the closest thing you have. If you know who your community members are, I'm pretty sure you know who your social workers, your nurses are. Sit down with them, talk, ask questions. Small towns, we still have a bunch of those people. We have a bunch of nurses, we have a bunch of social workers. Maybe not all of us work directly in the field, but we all work in some area of the field, right? We may be policy writers. we may be grant writers, but even though all of us may not be in the clinical setting, we're all communicating together. We're all interlocked at some level, right? Whether it be like me and my first clinical supervisor, we're no longer clinical, we're no longer working together directly, but we're still connected through our faith, and we help each other with, resources and referrals, right? So we're still communicating, even if we're not both working in the same specific area. We're still helping each other out. So tap into to your neighbors. Your neighbors have information. Somebody knows somebody that can get you the help that you need. Pay attention to what's popping up around you. Seek out what's around you. Like, for example, we have a big sign. Las Cumbres has a big sign. The hospital has a big sign. We're noticeable. Pay attention to those. And I think the biggest thing is don't be afraid to seek help. I think a lot of it is fear of being judged.
Right.
And one of the greatest lessons I learned was it's not about judging. It's, when we're talking about judgment, we're really talking about, are we being condemning of the person? Because we all make judgments every day, right? Like, I made a judgment to be on this podcast. I made a judgment to, even what I was going to wear this morning for a shirt, right? Like, that's a judgment. But I think the bigger worry is, are you being condemned, right? Because if I'm telling you don't use drugs, that in of itself is a judgment, right? But is a person being condemning? Is a person being belittling? I think that's the bigger thing that people need to look at, is how am I being treated versus am I being called out? Am I being told about my behaviors are not safe for me, right? Because when we say don't use, we're not being judgmental. We're just saying that's dangerous, right? And so I think we have to be careful how we utilize words, because I think sometimes we don't use words correctly, or sometimes we blanket statement with words. So like, I don't talk to my clients about judgment. I ask the question, am I being condemning? Am I being insulting? Like, I try to use those kinds of words versus judgment, because it's a judgment call every day. Every moment's a judgment call.
Right.
And judgment, I think, is very much a neutral word, but I think we've made it a bad word. And I think it's really more about condemning and belittling and treating people horribly. I think that's the bigger issue, not necessarily making a judgment.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. I like that. Obviously we can't share, private information, but do you have any a success story that really stands out in your mind that you can share pieces of it, or and protect privacy, or do you have any? Are you not able to do that?
Well, I mean, there's two of my first clients from OI recovery. I still see them on occasion, and they're doing 100% sober. One of them progressively has improved his employment, his personal, like his intimate life. He went from not being employed to working for an extermination company to now getting a job at the lab, at the national lab. Right. And every so often I see him, I'll say maybe once or twice a year, and he's like, dude, what are you doing, man? I'm still sober. I'm like, good job, brother. And then there's another gentleman, same thing. He really struggled with alcohol, and I still see him on occasion as well, and it's the same thing. I'm still sober, dude. Like, it's every time we see each other, it's like, I'm still sober. I'm going on this much time sober, and it's just cool to know that even though I didn't do the work because it's them, but to be able to have been a part of their journey.
Yeah.
To just have been a part of that journey and being able to be their cheerleader and hold them accountable. Like the first gentleman, he was about to finish IOP. He ended up in jail for 3 months. Then he came out, he comes out, he goes, man, I only have a few more weeks left of IOP. I was like, nah, bro, like, you gotta start from day one, dude. Like, you've been gone for so long, day one. He's like, oh, that's not cool, man. I said, dude, day one, man. You've been gone for too long. And now he says, I'm glad you did that to me. I'm glad that you made me redo everything from scratch. He goes, because I'm sober and I'm maintaining that sobriety. So those are two cases that, really stick out, because these guys really struggled with mental health issues and a lot of external things that led them to their alcoholism. But they were able to overcome and build bridges for their emotional and their, PTSD, depression stuff. You're able to build bridges over those things and be able to move forward and maintain sobriety for almost 10 years now.
Wow. Yeah. One thing I like about rural communities is that I think urban therapists don't get to see is you don't get to see that long-term progress, because these are people you see every day because you're in a small community. And so I think it's so rewarding to be able to see them in the community and see them thriving that we often, when they leave therapy, if you were in a big city, you wouldn't see how they were doing.
Well, even as a nurse, right? Even as a nurse, because I was a nurse for 10 years before I even jumped into social work. And even at that, as a nurse, I never felt that I was really being effective, right? Because it's like you work for them for 12 hours, then somebody else takes over. And then, and in the hospital, you're dealing with 5, 10 people in one shift. So you're not really seeing what you're doing. But as a social worker, you get to work with these people individually, one-on-one. And you get to see that progress, specifically see that progress day in, day out. And either you see them succeed or you see them fail. But you get to see that process. And then if they fail, then for me, I evaluate, okay, what could I have done differently to support this person? Did I miss anything? Or was it just, they're just more ready? And the people who succeeded, okay, what was able to contribute to that? Where did I not do so great? So next time I can do a little bit better, right? So I'm always evaluating where I was at in the good and the negative sides of their process.
Yeah. Can you think of any policy or system changes that you could think would make a huge difference for people living in these rural communities?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say about policies because, I think what we do have in place is there. And I think it's hard to gauge policies because I see a lot more of the person's inability or ability to want to engage. I think it's more, I think for me, what I think would be more beneficial is really teaching people what addiction is. Really being able to bring families into therapy and teaching the family members, the support system, what the patient is going through. Because I think if we can help people understand what addiction actually is, how it impacts the brain, how it impacts other systems of the body, and why people may want to just stay stuck in the addiction. Because it's easier to deal with this than it is to deal with the sickness and withdrawals and the after effects. Sometimes it's just easier just to stay stuck. It's just easier because you don't have to deal with all this. But I think if we could teach people what addiction actually, how it impacts the body, how the body just adjusts to these things, and it's hard to adjust away from it as well, right? The difficulties in that. And if we could teach people to have a different conversation when the family member is struggling, instead of accusing, oh, you're back to using again, saying, okay, how is your day going? What's going on with you today? Like, I noticed that you're a little bit off. Versus, are you using again? Did you go get high? Are you going to go get high? Instead of having that conversation, more like preventative conversation. What's going on? I noticed you're a little bit sadder today. I noticed that, right? And really call out what's observable, what's actually real, and then work through that process. I actually had the opportunity to do that with a couple of families. And this younger gentleman was able to actually not relapse in those moments, simply because the family changed the questioning rather than accusing. They just they did check-ins. Right. Whatever happened to that kid, I don't know. I left that agency before he was done, but I know I was able to help in that moment. And I think it's more about education, because we can write all the policies we want, but if we don't teach people about the process and what these policies actually mean and what they're supporting, and they understand what's going on, we can write policies all day long and we can create systems all day long. But if people aren't accessing them because of not knowing, stigma, stubbornness, distrust of medicine, distrust of psychology, distrust of list, whatever it is, if we can't get buy-in, nothing, all these policies don't mean anything. There has to be buy-in first. Then we can start tweaking policies as we see where they're either not working or have shortcomings. But buy-in is, I think, more important than policies right now. And then policies can come in when we're able to really implement them and find out if they're really working or not.
Mm-hmm. What keeps you motivated in the work you do in these smaller communities?
Because I come from a tradition based in social work. Even though it was never called social work back 200 years ago, it was based in the idea of social work, right? So the religious order I belonged to, when the community was in need, they stepped in, right? So if a brother died, then the brotherhood would take care of the widow and the children. They took care of the elderly. They took care of the community in all aspects. So social work was a part of who I am from a faith perspective. And for me, it's about giving back to the place that gave me what I have and who I am. So for me, it's how can I make my town better? Or how can I bring it back to what it used to be? I mean, I know I'm not going to take it back to what it used to be in terms of like functioning and stuff, but in terms of attitude, in terms of like how we relate to each other. So for me, what drives me is the fact that I'm in my community, I'm helping my people, and I'm helping resurrect what our people were functioning, were, farmers, were, good neighbors, faithful to customs, culture, tradition. And that's what drives me, right? And when I get to see a neighbor or a community member graduate successfully from drug court, right? Seeing them smile, seeing their family smile, that's what drives me is knowing that I'm being the change I want to see.
Yeah.
And even though I may not see it all the time with every client, but if I see it, if my philosophy is if I can help one person, then I've done my duty, But yeah, I just love my community and I want to see it succeed. So that's what drives me is just making my community being the successful community that it can be.
Mm-hmm. Is there any last bit of advice or comments or anything you want to leave the listeners with before we end today?
I think one thing that's important is taking care of yourself, being grounded and rooted in your philosophy, in your belief system, and being rooted in that and knowing how to take care of yourself emotionally, physically, spiritually. Because it's easy to burn out. It's easy to be so ingrained that you just burn out. The other thing is we have to understand that the clients are not ours. They're not ours, right? Their problems are not our problems. We are a support system. We are leaders. We are guides. We are supports. We are educators for them, but we're not that. But their problems aren't our problems, and we can't own their problems. I've seen too many social workers burn out because they want to own their clients' problems, and they're so entangled in their problems that they end up burning out themselves. Our job isn't to become them. Our job is to support them, guide them, and be the stability, not become the same breakdown with them, So take care of yourself. Have actual self-care. Not survival self-care, but actual self-care.
Yeah, that is huge.
You're actually regenerating yourself, right? So I just came off of a 3-day retreat that I do every year. It's a spiritual retreat, physically exhausting, but emotionally and spiritually replenishing. It replenishes me spiritually and emotionally. Physically, it does take a toll on me. I'm not going to lie about that. But when I come back to work Monday morning, I'm refreshed. I'm ready to go. Another year of dealing with people and helping people's problems. Until next year, I go back and, let go of that negative stuff and regenerate with the good stuff.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I appreciate you coming on and thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to present about rural New Mexico.
Yeah.
If there are stories or issues that you face in your practice and you would like me to discuss those on this podcast, please send me a message at theruralsocialworker@gmail.com and I will be happy to take a look. One of the goals of this podcast is storytelling, and I believe that to be impactful, you need context, and that is where stories come in. They give us something to work with and something to build on. I also believe that stories from multiple different rural communities will offer more information and provide more support to rural social workers everywhere. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this episode and will subscribe for more. Thank you for joining me for another insightful episode of The Rural Social Worker. If you've enjoyed our exploration into the vital work of social work in rural communities, be sure to subscribe, share, and connect with me on social media. Your support helps me continue my mission of closing the gaps and fostering resilience in the places that often go unnoticed. Remember, this podcast is not a substitute for official supervision in your professional journey. Until next time, stay engaged, stay informed, and keep making a difference in rural communities.